Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. I hope you had a great weekend. It is, of course, our Monday edition of Point of View. And I want to start with a question. What is even better than one vaccine against the coronavirus? How about two vaccines against the coronavirus, which actually is even more effective and can be stored in a refrigerator and does not need some of the complex storage requirements that the Pfizer vaccine needs? So we'll talk about that in just a minute. A lot of articles we've posted on the website over the weekend. Perhaps you are aware of the fact that there were pro-Trump demonstrators. There was an attempt to actually show support for President Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. And as you might imagine, they were attacked by BLM supporters, Antifa supporters, and so one of our articles questions why you don't have the so-called president-elect, which, again, is not even close to being decided yet, why Joe Biden didn't call for unity in that regard. But nevertheless, that's one of those issues. Still some ongoing questions about whether or not these election results are effectively based upon wise kind of integrity and a variety of other issues, and whether or not there is some question about that. So we'll get to those in just a minute. And of course, one of the questions that even surfaced over the weekend had to do with the Dominion voting systems, because at least one individual is convinced that these systems did delete votes, and that will make the difference. So those are all topics that we will try to address this hour. Let me give you an advance look for next hour, and that is Danielle D'Souza Gill. That's Dinesh D'Souza's daughter, has written a very good book called The Choice, which provides, I think, 21 very good answers to a lot of the pro-abortion rhetoric. So we'll talk about that with her at the 1 o'clock hour. And then we'll come back into some of the issues and news in the 2 o'clock hour. Before we finish off today, from about 2:30 to 3, we'll have Brian Sumner with us, an individual that was one of the leading skateboarders at one time, and yet even in the midst of all the success that he had, ended up being a very angry young man, divorcing his wife, messing his life up. Matter of fact, as a result of his need to do community service, decided one time to volunteer to work in this Christian thrift shop, and saw some books and went over, and the first book he picked up was The Case for Christ. And that led to him becoming a Christian, led to him actually remarrying his wife, spending much more time not only in the skateboarding world, but now even in the church world, speaking to this. And so, again, individual that has done the I Am Second film, but also I Hated, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And so we'll get into some of the things that are happening in his world. So we'll talk about all this in the next hour before we're certainly done as well. Lots to talk about, but let's come back to the vaccine for just a minute. If nothing else, this particular article makes the case that even better news than hearing about Pfizer's coronavirus vaccine being 90% effective is the fact that another pharmaceutical company, one we've mentioned on this program many times before, Moderna, announced that the company's experimental vaccine was 94%, actually 94.5% effective in preventing COVID-19 based on some of the data that they have. And perhaps the most significant part of that is that it can be stored in regular refrigerator temperatures. That has been one of the questions people have had about Pfizer, because you need dry ice and having to keep it at a much colder temperature. So ultimately, between Pfizer and Moderna, it is at least possible that the United States could have as many as 60 million doses of the vaccine ready by the end of the year. And again, these are both ones where you have to take 2 doses. So at least the first part of the dose could be started by the end of the year, and then you have to wait actually a month later for the next one. So if nothing else, this has been good news for those who would actually take the vaccine. As you've heard me say on this program before, there are a fairly significant number of people that are skeptical, not just the typical kind of anti-vaccine individuals, but when you have the governor of New York saying, I don't even trust this because it came out under the Trump administration. Oh boy, here we go again. Because in some respects, these are not involving some of the questions of other kinds of vaccines. I won't get into that today because probably nobody would care, and it might not convince anybody anyway. But if you go and look at the testing, and you look at what it does, especially the Pfizer one, which is probably best known so far, actually uses mRNA to force your body to have your body create a protein. And that protein, which is enough like the protein that is in the coronavirus, then causes the antibodies in your body to come forward, to develop. And so as a result, you develop antibodies for the vaccine. And this is very different than, say, taking, as we've sometimes done, an attenuated version of the vaccine and actually put it in your body. And some people are always concerned about that, and I can understand why. Let me, for just a minute, since we're talking about Pfizer, point out something which I first began to be aware of and I'm even more concerned about, and that is many people notice that Pfizer actually waited till after the election, even 2 days after the media declared Joe Biden as the president-elect, before they released the results of their vaccine trials, which they knew back in October. And as a result, when they did release those particular results, guess who they told first? Not the president, not the Secretary of Health and Human Services. The first person that got the phone call, Joe Biden, which I think probably tells you everything you need to know. Days into the administration under Donald Trump, remember when he called all the pharmaceutical executives together in the White House and told them that we have to lower drug prices? Donald Trump signed actually 4 executive orders with the intent of cutting prescription drug costs. And that caused a lot of people in Pfizer and others in Big Pharma to say, Donald Trump's really not our friend. We expect people to say out on the campaign trail, we're going to lower prescription drug prices, but we didn't really expect him to do it. And he started doing it, and he's not our friend. And so as a result, you've had all sorts of statements that are now coming out. And I love one of these statements that came from the senior vice president of Pfizer, who actually said, Karen Jensen, we have never been part of Warp Speed. We have never taken any money from the U.S. government or from anyone. Okay, that's at least a misstatement, if not, for those of you that are less gracious, a lie. Yes, it is true that Pfizer never received any federal funds to research the vaccine, but to say they weren't part of Operation Warp Speed, yes, they were. As a matter of fact, it was Operation Warp Speed that actually helped them actually accelerate their ability to manufacture this vaccine. So this idea that we were never part of Warp Speed, we were never part of doing anything with the Trump administration is a bit much. And, of course, you can certainly discover that as you start looking at what is called the Open Secrets Act, that Joe Biden received $256,000 in campaign contributions from individuals at Pfizer. Trump received about $62,000. And so it illustrates again who their friend was, and it's Joe Biden. And maybe we'll get into this a little bit later in the 2 o'clock hour, but it just illustrates again that Pfizer probably deliberately waited till after the election to actually announce good news. And now we have Moderna's as well. Let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover. We will do so right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We're often told to trust the experts, and that is good advice when you're dealing with a true expert. I want a plumbing expert in my house if I have a water leak. I want a doctor with medical expertise doing surgery on me, and I want a trained pilot flying the plane I'm taking from one city to another. No, I'm talking about experts who don't really know the real world, but often have great power in the media and politics to control you. That was illustrated the other day in a tweet from David Brooks, who writes for the New York Times. The day after the election, he admitted that the media got their predictions all wrong. He said, "Pretty massive failure. We still are not good at capturing the right word half of the country." People in the media, along with professors in the university and politicians and bureaucrats in government, really don't understand you. Yet they have enormous power to influence your views and to control your lives. It reminded me of the test Charles Murray put together years ago to measure how thick is your bubble. He found that people who live in a bubble isolated from the world can be found in New York City, Silicon Valley, Los Angeles, and the suburbs around Washington, D.C. These are the media experts who determine what you read, hear, and see in the news media, social media, and entertainment. They are also powerful people in government who pass laws and write regulations that control your lives. There are two lessons we should learn here. First, don't be like them. Sometimes it can be fairly easy for us as Christians to retreat inside our own bubble, read articles and watch programs done by people who are not like you. But the second and most important lesson is don't always trust the judgment of some of these experts. They may be very disconnected from your world and don't see it the way you see it. Trust your own judgment. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's see if we can talk about some of the questions being raised about the election. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but nevertheless, because it's in the news, it deserves your attention. And in particular, in just a few minutes, I want to talk about some of these false internet rumors. If there's any kind of service that we can provide, it's that when you see something that shows up on your Twitter feed or your Facebook page, you go, oh, I need to pass that on. One in particular involved Representative Louis Gohmert, who's been on this program before, has even been a guest host. And also, in addition to Louis Gohmert, also was something that was passed on by George Papadopoulos, who's been on the program as well. And yet it turns out that's a false report. And so sometimes when you see something from an individual that you trust, and we do, you find out that some of that had gotten twisted as it went out. And we, I think, should always be concerned about truth, make sure that we're not passing on false information. After all, if we're going to be critical of the media in which they're doing fake news sometimes, we shouldn't be guilty of the same process. Does that make sense? So yeah, we'll get to that in just a minute. But some respects, Andrew McCarthy has been saying what I've sort of been saying for a couple of days now, but he puts it in such a very articulate way, in which he points out that if you want to understand why some of this looks like it's a lot of hue and cry for very little, or can I even be as blunt as to say that some of the things that are being pursued right now by the Trump campaign and the lawyers look like a fool's errand. And I don't mean to be critical, because these are lawyers and individuals that are politically savvy and certainly probably understand more than I do. But I think Andrew McCarthy, who also has a legal background and an individual that we've talked about before, puts it this way, in which he says what you really need to do is maybe just take what has been seen as kind of the most significant case, legal case, by the Trump challenge of the election, and that is a case that would go to the Supreme Court. And the case is having to do with Pennsylvania, and it's one that we've talked about before, because the Supreme Court decided not to decide whether or not you could have ballots arrive after the election. And so the bottom line is that about, in round numbers, 10,000 of these ballots were allowed to arrive after the election. They were, according to Associate Justice Samuel Alito, supposed to be separated. But again, here's how he puts it. It's about 10,000 votes, and if you're keeping score, that's not close to what Trump needs, because the president trails in Pennsylvania, trails Joe Biden by 55,000 votes. It's anything but clear that even if all 10,000 of those late arriving ballots are Biden votes, and I'm not sure they are, I'm not sure they're 50-50, but I'm certainly not sure that they're 100-0. He says a good number of them, as he said, could be for Donald Trump. And so even if you suspend disbelief and believe they're all Biden votes, the president would still be 45,000 votes short of flipping the state into his win column. And so that's what I think Andrew McCarthy has been saying for some time, and we've sort of set it around the table here as well. Here's his comment. He says there's always a mismatch between the impropriety alleged and the remedy that it could yield. Now, I have no problem with the kind of investigation that's taking place right now, because I am convinced that voter fraud does take place. I'm not convinced it's at the level enough for it to change the election outcome. But because it was so close, this may be the first time you actually have a major party and a candidate really pursuing that. So maybe we can ferret out where voter fraud does take place, number one. And number two, as I've said on this program more than once, but I will say it again, I have noticed a real switch. Even a few months ago, you were still having commentators saying there's no voter fraud. Now you're starting to see them say, well, there's no widespread voter fraud. And I found one the other day in USA Today. There's no example of massive voter fraud. Okay, at least we're acknowledging now that there's some of that out there. But again, the point is that when Andrew McCarthy was on Fox News on Friday, there were people that were very upset that he was actually pointing some of these facts out there, but they're important facts. And he said, when people ask, should the president actually exercise his legal rights? And he said, well, I won't presume to ask for the president, but if I were the case, I think I would acknowledge the reality that the election is lost. And but that is not to concede, as he said, any kind of voter irregularities. And so the argument I will make and continue to make is, if those voter irregularities are so severe as to overturn the election, let's prove that. And it has to be proven essentially in a court of law, where you are dealing with the presumption of innocence unless you can prove guilt. And the very, very high bar needs to be the case. Now, there are some things that look very fishy, and one of the articles that I have posted here by Matt Vespa actually gives you the statistical analysis that we talked about on Friday, primarily from Lathan Watts, although we also had some other material there as well. And you can see that, first of all, you can look in certain places where, let's use Wisconsin as an example, you had 89% turnout. Is that possible? Theoretically, it's possible, but not likely. Kimberly Strassel has been on the program with us before, did the math, and basically said it would require 900,000 people showing up for same-day registrations, which kind of makes it kind of unlikely indeed in terms of Wisconsin. But the point I want to make is actually deeper in the article we've posted, and I would encourage you to read it, and then this would be a good article to post because it makes the case when you look at these four particular cities where in every case the turnout was much farther along, much larger, much more significant than it was 4 years ago under Hillary Clinton. In most places, as we're looking at it right now, Joe Biden underperformed what Hillary Clinton did 4 years ago. And there are four really outstanding exceptions, and those are the four cities in the states that had to be taken by Joe Biden. And so let's get into those in a little bit more detail. This comes from Richard Barris of Big Data Poll, who noted as he looked at these cities that the numbers just kind of shut off the moon, as he said, in these four cities. He said Trump won the largest non-white vote share for a Republican presidential candidate in 60 years. Biden underperformed Hillary Clinton in every major metro area around the country except for Milwaukee, Detroit, Atlanta, and Philadelphia. And, of course, each one of those is key, obviously, for those states. And so Robert Barnes, the election analyst that was looking at this, said big cities and swing states run by Democrats are, in some respects, having votes even exceeded the number of registered voters. That's his argument. I'm not sure you can actually come up with that. But the victories by Donald Trump in the past, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, were on target until the middle of the night. Counting was arbitrarily halted. Miraculously, all of a sudden, several hundred thousands of votes, all for Biden, were beginning to be found, and those, in some respects, showed in every case that the lead that Donald Trump had vanished. Now, again, does that prove that something illegal was done? No, but it does say that statistically it's kind of intriguing. Which brings me to something which we will talk about after the break, and that is kind of the biggest blockbuster came from Sidney Powell. Now, Sidney Powell's been on this program. One of the co-hosts actually interviewed her. She's an attorney, and she was on a number of various talk shows, but one in particular, Sunday Morning Futures, and being part of the legal team of Trump, really focused some time and attention on the Dominion voting systems. And when we come back from the break, what I want to try to do is kind of give you the point counterpoint. We have this very good article that kind of summarizes her article and summarizes her actual statements about the Dominion voting system, and is convinced that they actually, in many cases, did delete votes or switch votes from Biden to Trump. This isn't just speculation. It did happen in one county. We talked about that on Friday. But is, again, that at the level that would call the election into question. So to be fair, I have posted a piece from USA Today arguing that even though the Dominion voting systems might have had a flaw, they did not delete these votes. And then the piece, which we'll talk about after the break, by attorney Sidney Powell, that argues that they did, and that should throw the entire presidential election into question. And so we'll get back into that after the break. Of course, there is a call by Jenna Ellis for the states to actually audit these Dominion machines. And it also then brings us to that piece that was floating around the internet that came from our friend Louis Gohmert. So we'll talk about all that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again,
is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. One of the things that people are talking about now is the Dominion voting systems, also called Smartmatic. And it will be important before we head too far into it to recognize Dominion voting systems has been used in other countries. I've learned that it was first developed in Venezuela, so that's important. The head of the chairman of the boards of Symantec is actually on Vice President Joe Biden's transition team, which causes a lot of people to say, okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But again, this allegation was put forward, first of all, by Sidney Powell. You might say, okay, who is she? Well, she's an attorney. She also has been lately part of the Trump campaign and was the individual that I believe, wasn't it, Dr. Merrill Matthews, I think, had her on because she was the attorney for Michael Flynn. So she's been on the program before and is a very reputable individual, but at the same time making some what could be considered completely outrageous claims, which, by the way, if true, are going to throw everything in the presidential election into some kind of turmoil. But again, allow me to be a little skeptical, and you should as well, because what she said on Fox Sunday Morning Futures is that she has enough evidence to launch a serious criminal investigation. Her direct quotes were, "We're fixing to overturn the election results in multiple states, and President Trump won by not just hundreds of thousands of votes, but by millions of votes that were shifted by this software that was designed expressly for that purpose." She went on to say, "We have sworn witness testimony about why this software was designed, and it was designed to rig elections." Okay, these are incredible claims. If true, oh boy, can you imagine what comes next? That's why I'm a little bit skeptical. I think you should be as well. According to, again, Sidney Powell, the witness that the Trump team has seen how this has been used in other elections to rig other elections, and those same tactics and software, she says, were deployed here. Okay, well, the host of Fox News, Maria, actually pushes back pretty hard and says, wait a minute, this election's supposed to be certified. By the way, I might just point out, the electors go to the state capitol after the state certifies the election. Today, in a number of states, those actual vote totals have to be certified. But any of the states that we're talking about here, the so-called battleground states, I think 2 of them next Monday have to be certified. So, again, the clock is ticking here, okay? Well, first of all, the reaction, again, from Sidney Powell was, first of all, I've never say anything I can't prove. I hope so. Secondly, the evidence is coming in so fast I can't even process it all. Millions of Americans have written by now. I would say definitely hundreds of thousands have stepped forward with their different experiences of voter fraud, and this is a massive election fraud. Okay, and I'm very concerned it not only involved Dominion and Smartmatic software, but the software is essentially used in other election machines as well. And so she points out that if you look at the software user's manual, it talks about how votes can be wiped away. She says it's absolutely brazen how people bought this system and why they bought this system. By the way, since I'm broadcasting in the state of Texas, guess what? Texas declined not to use the Dominion software because of their concerns that fraud could be used. It's interesting. And by the way, as you might imagine, Donald Trump put that in one of his tweets. And then, of course, there are concerns in this particular article about how the software can be utilized. The attorney said that software and election officials have the ability to do things like delete ballots, force the machine not to read voters' signatures, or actually delete the top one but keep the down ballot. Because that's one of the arguments you've been getting even from some of the late-night talk show hosts and some of the Democrats that said, now tell me this, the Republicans actually were able to do very well in the Senate elections. As a matter of fact, they did so well in the House, they almost overtook the House. If these few elections of the left, that go the way of Republicans are going right now. Nancy Pelosi is going to need Pepto-Bismol because it is going to be almost a split Democrat-Republican House of Representatives. So how did Republicans do so well in the House and the Senate, but not so well for the presidency? Okay, nevertheless, that is a way it could be programmed. It also can be programmed to only count votes for Biden. And she said it's like a drag and drop wherever you want, whatever you want to upload the votes. Okay, those are outrageous comments. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, if they are true, we are in just uncharted territory. But it's year 2020, so I guess possible, which is why I've posted this other very good article that does a fact check on this, in which, as you might imagine, people for the Dominion voting machines and smart tech are saying, no, none of this can happen. No, none of it did happen. And so there we go. And so that brings me to the other piece, and that is that Jenna Ellis, she, I think, has been on the program with Penna or Dr. Muriel Matthews, is one of the senior advisors for the Trump campaign, and she says that the states cannot and should not certify their elections without an audit being done on the Dominion voting systems. And so she actually said we need to have an audit of this. This is something that, of course, is going to change the national outcome of the election. What we're seeing is a really significant challenge. A little bit later, she went on to say it's a feature where they're able to take votes that were cast for President Trump and change them to Joe Biden. These come from machines, as she points out, that were first developed in Venezuela. That certainly causes some people to wonder about that. And they're able then to add ballots, count ballots multiple times. This is a feature. So, again, if we have a paper trail, we should be able to count them up. If all of it is electronic, which is, again, one of the issues we've talked about before, yes, you can vote electronic, but you also have a paper trail, so we'll see where that goes. But, of course, that paper trail right now, even being counted in Georgia, Donald Trump the other day said, well, just stop the counting in Georgia because they don't even check the signatures. So that's the issue we had with Georgia, whether or not these were additional ballots just simply coming in from people that weren't actually the individuals who were being sent the ballot. So we will see. I think it is reasonable to have a lot of skepticism about this. It sounds to me like kind of a Hail Mary. And if you think about this in terms of gambling. I'm not a gambler, but, you've always said, I put my money on, black. I put my money on 27. If indeed you were convinced that these machines were erroneous, wouldn't you put most of your money on the Dominion voting machines? And they've put an enormous amount of money, and I mean money, time, resources, lawyers, on challenging, which in many cases are just process lawsuits about whether or not these particular absentee ballots should be counted, whether these that came in after the November 3rd date should be counted. But if you were convinced that all of that is erroneous because we have machines that aren't counting right, wouldn't you spend more time on it? So nevertheless, that's the case. But just before we take a break, here's another good example, and that is if you were out on the internet, especially on Facebook, I saw this. Let's see, it's Saturday night, Sunday morning, I can't remember where, in which they were saying, we have evidence now coming from Representative Louis Gohmert and passed on by George Papadopoulos, both of whom have been on this program. George Papadopoulos, you might remember, was in the Trump campaign, in which the U.S. Army raided the office of the Spanish election software company, Citial, I think is how you pronounce it, in Frankfurt, to seize the servers to see if there's evidence of voter irregularities. Well, okay, that's pretty interesting because when you've just already heard all this about the election software, going to the servers that might store that might be something that the U.S. Army might want to do. But nevertheless, where did this come from? Well, Louis Gohmert in a particular area said he did get across a German tweet that was talking about an alleged raid of these servers. And so this was sort of headed out there, but he didn't necessarily, even in his point, he said at one point, I don't know the truth, I just have heard that. Well, that was enough to stimulate all sorts of people sending all these stories around about Representative Louis Gohmert, and now George Papadopoulos pulled together all this information where the U.S. armies are seizing the servers for Dominion in Germany. Just one problem with that. According to the Army, that is not the case. First of all, the U.S. Army did not seize anything in Barcelona or Frankfurt or anywhere else, and it's one of those examples of where the false rumor heads out all over the world before the truth can get its boots on, to paraphrase an old phrase. And so, again, if you come across one of these false reports, and it is a false report, that the people in the U.S. Army were actually seizing the servers of Dominion, there's no truth to it, and it doesn't mean that Louis Gohmert or anybody else did anything wrong. Even at the time, he admitted, I don't know the truth to this tweet, but it took off before everybody could say, wait a minute, stop, that's not probably the case. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention, as a program note, at the top of the hour, we're going to be talking with Danielle D'Souza Gill. We're going to be talking about her book, which really does a very good job of answering much of the rhetoric for pro-abortionists. And I think you will really enjoy the book, the conversation with her, and also be amazed that somebody who is as young is so articulate. But she did grow up around Dinesh D'Souza, so that's certainly the case. Since we're broadcasting in Texas primarily, let's say something nice about Mark Cuban. I don't always say nice things about Mark Cuban. Sometimes he says some things that are a little bit controversial, but here is a very good comment that he made on Twitter that then was completely assaulted by the leftists. And no good comment goes unpunished. So here we go. It turns out that Mark Cuban, billionaire, of course, you see him on all sorts of different programs, tweeted the other day, for those considering donating to either Republicans or Democrats in the Georgia Senate runoffs, which, by the way, will happen in January, can you please reconsider and donate that money to your local food bank and organizations that can help those without food or shelter? Let's put Americans in need above politics. What a great comment. You know, and I love what Derek Hunter puts. He said, who could be upset by that? Oh, it turns out a lot of people. First of all, let's put this in perspective, because Derek mentions the fact that in South Carolina and Kentucky, Democrats spent almost $200 million. And if you're not familiar, we've run through these numbers, but here it is again. Spent $108 million to try to get rid of Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. Spent $90 million trying to get rid of Mitch McConnell in Kentucky. $69 million to try to get rid of Susan Collins in Maine. How about $24 million to try to get rid of John Cornyn in Texas? All of that money to no avail. So Mark Cuban was kind of saying, hey, you know, I know there's going to be more money spent than we've ever probably spent on senatorial elections in Georgia, because the Republicans have to defend the seats and the Democrats want to take both seats so they could get a 50-50 tie in the Senate and thus be able to control the Senate. And so you can understand why he said that, and I think it is very wise indeed. But you had all sorts of people criticizing it, and let me just pick one. Derek Hunter talks about the response that came from left-wing activist and singer John Legend. John Legend said, I get that politics is annoying and contentious, but the bottom line is the Senate flipping would be far more impactful than a food bank donation. We need massive stimulus and aid to individuals and small businesses. Government needs to do this. Charity isn't sufficient. Can I give you a response to some of that? A couple of thoughts. I'm going to do this in a commentary. It'll come out next week. But one of those is simply this. The argument that charity isn't sufficient, first of all, I don't tend to go to Hollywood celebrities for information about charitable giving and government policies. But nevertheless, if you've listened to this program or ever received my Viewpoints commentary, know, for example, I've quoted from Don Eberly in his well-documented book about how Americans are unbelievably generous. In one of his books, The Rise of Global Civil Society, he documents how whenever there's been any kind of disaster, recent or distant disaster, private voluntary organizations usually always have a greater capacity to raise funds than the government. Whether it's a tsunami, whether it's an earthquake, it is always charitable giving that is not only sufficient, but exceeds what the government does. That's pretty interesting. Part of it, I think, gets to the fact that as some people point out, even Derek Hunter in his piece, that for liberals, charity is the government, which I always get a kick out of. Government is not charity. Charity is voluntary. And if you think government is charity, don't pay your taxes and voluntarily decide not to pay your taxes and see what the response comes your way very quickly. Let's take another one. Arthur Brooks been on the program with us as well. He wrote the book years ago, back when he was a professor at Syracuse. And of course, then he was at American Enterprise Institute and all the rest. But nevertheless, he documented in that book, for anybody who's willing to look at it, that liberals and conservatives are very different. Conservatives give much more than liberals. Religious people give much more than secular people. And it isn't just giving to churches and things like that. They found that conservatives give more to help the poor. Conservatives give more blood than liberals do. Matter of fact, they said if all Americans gave blood at the level that conservatives did, we probably would never have a blood shortage in America. So, I mean, it's, on every possible way they give, but they also give more in terms of their time, their money, their blood, all of this. And so, again, I understand why John Legend is convinced that we need to spend inordinate amounts of millions of dollars in Georgia because we need to get these two Democrats elected so that then Joe Biden and Kamala Harris can do all of wonderful work. But there is one other difficulty with that. And that is government not only doesn't give as much as charity in most of these cases, government gives it in a very inefficient way. The amount that is taken off the top for all sorts of salaries and regulations and everything. And, oh, by the way, can I mention one other thing? The government is broke. I mean, the government isn't just broke. The government is $27 trillion past broke. If I say you're broke, that means you don't have any money in the bank. But if you were to say, well, I also don't have any money in the bank, but I also have $27,000 in credit card debt, I'd say you're $27,000 past broke. And the federal government is $27 trillion past broke. And this answer that government's going to solve these problems, I don't think so. So anyway, that's just one of those issues that I thought I might put on the table as well. And while we are just coming to the end here, there are certainly a number of people that are saying before we just completely forget these elections, something has to happen with all the polling. A very good piece by Kristen Soltis Anderson, no relation, in which he pointed out that we've had a history of polling sometimes inaccurate. Back in 1936, Literary Digest said Alf Landon would be the next president. He wasn't. At that time, the Gallup poll was accurate, but then Gallup poll had to eat their crow because they were on the wrong side of Dewey defeats Truman. And, of course, 4 years ago, the pollsters told us that maybe they didn't call enough cell phones. Maybe they didn't catch and talk to enough people with college degrees. But they got it right this time. And they even told us that there wasn't such a thing as shy Trump voters. And they were so wrong, not just in the presidential election, because even if you buy the shy Trump voter argument, how did you not only miss the presidential election, but the Senate elections, the House elections, and even the state legislative elections? And if nothing else, I'm willing to say, while the pollsters are trying to figure out how they missed all of this so badly, maybe for sure we should no longer pay attention to these pollsters. And whatever they say about these two U.S. Senate races in Georgia, don't even believe it, because they have been proven wrong so many times that it's time for us to just simply take them and set them aside and don't even listen to them, don't even pay attention to them. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to spend some time with Danielle D'Souza Gill. But I thought for those of you that are going to be looking out in the night sky, we have something very unusual happening this week. 7 planets in our solar system will be visible in the night sky. So if you loved astronomy as I do, this is going to be quite a week to go up there and look at all of those planets. Saturn and Jupiter and Mars and Venus. It's just fascinating. So anyway, we're going to take a break. We're going to spend some time, first of all, talking about abortion. Then we'll get back into some of the news right after these important messages.
Election day has come and gone, so tell me, do people like you need to be more or less vigilant, more or less informed, more or less involved in making an impact? I think the answer is clear. Those who value freedom of conscience and religious liberty need to do more than ever to stand up for what the founders gave us and put America on track for greatness. Yes, we face challenges, but it's in the hard times that the greatest victories are seized and won. I urge you today, right now, to seize this opportunity and join the Point of View Radio Truth Team. Be part of the solution our nation needs. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The election is not the end of anything. It's another beginning. And when you join the Truth Team, you make it possible for millions of people to get the real news they desperately need and the practical marching orders that Kerby and the team at Point of View Radio give each day. Join us now in this critical moment. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
One of the needs for those of us that are pro-life is to really know how to answer some of the arguments, the cliches, and the various statements that are made oftentimes by people promoting abortion. And if you have our little booklet on abortion, you notice that one of the books I've recommended in the past is a very good book by Randy Alcorn, which has the title Pro-Life Answers to Pro-Choice Arguments. But I'd again have to admit that that book was written more than a quarter of a century ago, and so it has been really needed for us to have a very good book that would begin to address some of these arguments, some of these cliches, some of these slogans in a very significant and meaningful way, which is one of the reasons why I certainly want to endorse this new book that has just come out called The Choice: The Abortion Divide in America. Now, I was actually handed this by Danielle D'Souza, who said, "This is my daughter's book," and at the same time we'd also received a copy of the book from the publisher. So I am just so thrilled that we can spend some time with her this hour talking about her book and helping to equip you, because there's 21 different kinds of arguments that she begins to address in the book in about 5 different categories. If you're not familiar, Danielle D'Souza Gill is an individual that is an author, a commentator, a graduate of Dartmouth College, and author of Why God: An Intelligent Discussion of the Relevance of Faith. She's also filmed a number of videos that you perhaps have seen with PragerU. She's been on Turning Point USA, but this new book that is just out, The Choice: The Abortion Divide in America, and we have information about this book on our website, and of course we also have a link to our website. So Danielle, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
It was great to be with your father, and he was very proud of the book. And I said, well, I was somewhat aware of it, and especially since this one in my hands was specifically handed to me from Danielle D'Souza, I was thrilled. But let's, if we can, give people an overview of the book first, and we'll get into it, because you have a whole section on a cluster of cells. So how do we address some of the biological issues? Then my body, my choice, some of the kind of the feminist arguments, and then positive good, lesser of two evils, and better off dead. And so in some respects, what you've done is take really almost 24 of the very typical kinds of arguments and give some specificity to those. By the time we get to some of those at the end, I'm going, even I have a little difficulty wanting to respond to those. But you did this because your generation really needs to begin to know how to make the case for the pro-life movement, don't they?
Yes, exactly. I try to tackle really the most powerful arguments that we hear from the pro-choice side the most often, like my body, my choice, or a fetus is a cluster of cells. But I also go into some of those social arguments that you mentioned, because those are the questions I get asked a lot the most by young people. So I think it's important that we're equipped on kind of all angles so we can answer questions about anything that someone would ask us who is a pro-choicer or who might be considering what they think about this issue.
And again, as an individual that was speaking on college campuses in the 1970s, all we had at that time was the Handbook on Abortion by certainly John Wilkie, Dr. Wilkie. Now we have some great resources, but you really have taken on some very important material that needs to be covered. So just before we take our first break, let's get into the biological argument, because in that cluster of cells you have a couple. First of all, life begins when a baby is born. Even if it's technically a human life, a fetus doesn't feel anything. And there's a difference between a human being and a person, which is almost sort of a legal argument. But what about this? Because whether you come from a medical family as I do, or you only maybe took a biology class, we certainly recognize that life does not begin when a baby is born. Life begins at conception, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. And we were really only talking about different developmental stages. When it's in the womb, in utero, when it's born, when it's a toddler, when it's a young child, a teenager, an adult, and so on. So this idea that all of a sudden, poof, the baby comes into existence at the moment of birth really is not even scientifically correct. And in any case, there is no point of birth. There's no one moment where there's a birth, even if it's a C-section or some other way that the child is born, that doesn't exist. So we're really just talking about a matter of location when it comes to the birth itself. But I think when we look at this, the nature of this, we know that two human beings can only procreate another human being. It's physically impossible for them to procreate a rock, a plant, or some other kind of species. So we know this is a human being. And I think that sometimes people are shocked that I kind of have to establish this, but I have to do that in the first chapter. But I think that's why the left then pivots to saying that even though it's a human, it's not a person like the rest of us. Personhood is kind of this special status that only some of us have, because I think that scientifically it's irrefutable that it is a human.
Right. And again, I'll leave that one because you would think it was pretty obvious, but let's get into that one, because I find myself when I speak on college campuses or when I speak to even churches, what I oftentimes see is they'll make a distinction between a human being and a person. And since only a person is protected by the 14th Amendment, they want to redefine personhood. That doesn't work very well at all. And that's one of the reasons why you dedicated Chapter 3 to that area, because it is a very important issue that oftentimes is where the semantic games is played, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think that they kind of had to make that up in order to separate some people from other people. And of course, we know that this kind of justification of using this term personhood isn't being used in a positive manner in the sense that we're all persons. It's being used in the sense of them saying only some of us are persons. Other human beings are not persons. And they really would only do this in order to justify killing or torturing another human being. And we've seen this happen all around the world, of course, in the Holocaust and other instances. But I think that when we separate humanity from personhood, that's when we really open the door to these situations of torture. And of course, in every case, every human being is a person and deserves those human rights.
And I've oftentimes said you don't really want to go down that road, because we have seen what has happened when we redefine the personhood of individuals. It justifies all sorts of actions. So let's take a break. And again, these first 4 chapters deal with whether life begins when a child is born. Of course not. Whether or not individual is a fetus but doesn't feel anything. And we've talked about that sometimes in this program. Chapter 3, of course, deals with this idea that a human being is not a person. Chapter 4 deals with abortion is simple and safe. Of course, it is not. We've talked about that before. But when we come back, we really want to get into some of the chapters called My Body, My Choice. This is, of course, the slogan that you hear so often. And so what about this idea of a right to privacy, taxpayer funding? Women should have the freedom to choose what they want to do with their own body. Men should not even be addressing the abortion debate. And then we'll get into some of the others about whether abortion is a positive good or the lesser of two evils. So there's just all sorts of things that we are going to be talking about today. And if you find yourself saying, yes, I really would like to get a copy of that book, we have all the information that you need to not only go to Danielle's website, but also to order the book, both in hardback and Kindle. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We're often told to trust the experts, and that is good advice when you're dealing with a true expert. I want a plumbing expert with medical expertise doing surgery on me, and I want a trained pilot flying the plane I'm taking from one city to another. No, I'm talking about experts who don't really know the real world, but often have great power in the media and politics to control you. That was illustrated the other day in a tweet from David Brooks, who writes for the New York Times. The day after the election, he admitted that the media got their predictions all wrong. He said, pretty massive failure. We still are not good at capturing the right word half of the country. People in the media, along with professors in the university and politicians and bureaucrats in government, really don't understand you. Yet they have enormous power to influence your views and to control your lives. It reminded me of the test Charles Murray put together years ago to measure how thick is your bubble. He found that people who live in a bubble isolated from the world can be found in New York City, Silicon Valley, Los Angeles, and the suburbs around Washington, D.C. These are the media experts who determine what you read, hear, and see in the news media, social media, and entertainment. They are also powerful people in government who pass laws and write regulations that control your lives. There are two lessons we should learn here. First, don't be like them. Sometimes it can be fairly easy for us as Christians to retreat inside our own bubble, read articles and watch programs done by people who are not like you. But the second and most important lesson is don't always trust the judgment of some of these experts. They may be very disconnected from your world and don't see it the way you see it. Trust your own judgment. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Pleased to have with us today Danielle D'Souza Gill, and if you'd like to know more about her, we have a link to her website, DanielleD'SouzaGill.com, but you don't have to even know how to spell all that. Simply go to our website, pointofview.net, and it will link you there. We also have information about this book, which you will likely find in your bookstore, but also we've made it very easy for you to order it both in hardback and Kindle. Danielle, let's, if we can, get into some of the My Body, My Choice. And one of those chapters, chapter 5, is that the Constitution guarantees a right to privacy. That theoretically goes back to a case out of Connecticut, but it was used even more significantly in the 1973 decision of Roe versus Wade. And so if abortion is a constitutional right, then abortion, according to this argument, is a private decision between a woman and her doctor, and we should not interfere. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look back to Roe v. Wade, we've actually seen that it was very bad constitutional law, not just according to pro-lifers like ourselves, but also according to people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who have actually written that this right to privacy was not the right justification to use for Roe v. Wade. They should have found a different reason to justify it. And she comes up with a couple other ideas of herself. But this idea of right to privacy is actually nowhere to be found. This idea that abortion is a constitutional right. Abortion is not mentioned in the Constitution, but that's why they had to kind of create this right to privacy idea, which they basically based off of the idea of unreasonable search and seizure. The idea that if you're in your home or your car, you can't have it searched without a warrant. Now, what this has to do with abortion is very far off, but they literally couldn't find anything else to justify abortion. And so we see that even now, Roe v. Wade is very much on shaky ground as far as the Constitution goes. And I think that when we look back to that time when they used phrases like viability is kind of an important point, we've seen that even viability has only gotten earlier and earlier in pregnancy because of medical technology advancing and so on. And that's why the left has really started to distance themselves from the term of viability, and later cases have kind of made that a little bit more obsolete. But that was about 50 years ago. So technology has really changed drastically, and Roe v. Wade in that time, they did not have the knowledge that we have today.
And again, one of the things we've done on Point of View, even back when Marlon Maddox was the host in the 1980s, we talked about sonograms and ultrasound and those kinds of things, which provided a window to the womb. But, you mentioned in passing Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There's another quote that you have in here from Alan Dershowitz. He's been on the program with us a couple of times, and we find ourselves not necessarily agreeing with everything. And he's even said, I support a woman's right to choose. I always have. But then goes on to say that Roe versus Wade was a disaster, and even argues that it was not constitutional. And earlier in that chapter where you're talking about this, you do quote from Justice Harry Blackmun, who wrote the opinion in Roe versus Wade, in which he famously wrote, you point out, "We need not resolve the difficult question of when life begins." Well, Danielle, a number of years ago, I was doing a debate with an abortionist, and he was saying, I really don't know when life begins. And I said, well, I win. He said, what do you mean you win? I said, well, because always in a court of law, there's the presumption of innocence. You assume to be innocent rather than proven guilty. You assume that there is life unless you can prove there is not life. You never would have an individual coming wheeling into an emergency room after a car accident and say, well, I don't know if that person's alive or dead, put him in the morgue. No, of course not. And so in some respects, the Supreme Court violated one of the standard canons of if you will, jurisprudence. That is, the presumption of guilt is always upon the life taker. The benefit of doubt is always given to the life saver. So in some respects in your chapter, you just remind us of how poorly argued the Supreme Court decision was. And it isn't just Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it's Alan Dershowitz and others. But we can get into another chapter, because this one now is intended to pull upon your heartstrings. Chapter 6, poor women need access to abortion. In order for something to be a right, it must be meaningfully exercised. Abortion, therefore, must be taxpayer funded. Now, we have had some of these candidates that have at least agreed with the so-called Hyde Amendment that we shouldn't have taxpayer dollars going to abortion, but that's changed dramatically. So what about this idea that if indeed we're really concerned about poor women and access to abortion, we not only need to have abortion legal, but we have to pay for it with our tax dollars? What about that?
Yeah, it's an increasingly popular idea that the left is putting forward, this idea of overturning the Hyde Amendment. Many Democrats were in favor of the Hyde Amendment at the time when it was passed about 50 years ago. But since that's become increasingly unpopular, because the left really has this agenda of not just wanting abortion at 9 months, but wanting all of us to have to participate in that and have to pay for it. And I think if we really look at their argument, which is that in order for it to be a right, it must be meaningfully exercised and paid for, we have to look at what our rights are, our First Amendment rights, our freedom of speech, our freedom of religion. The government doesn't pay for me to have a laptop. It doesn't pay for me to get newspapers. It doesn't pay for me to have my Second Amendment right. It doesn't pay for me to have a weapon. It doesn't pay for really any of our fundamental rights. Then, of course, abortion is not a fundamental right. But even if it were a fundamental right, the government would not have to pay for it for me. But I think if we look at even their argument that poor women need to have these abortions, that is really what they've been pushing, even if we kind of shift towards their marketing, towards where they're placing their clinics and so on. So their goal is definitely to kind of have this overall social engineering aspect to it. And I think that taxpayer funding would absolutely kind of make that even worse, where certain people really are targeted to get abortions.
Very good. The title of your book is The Choice, The Abortion Divide in America. And one of your chapters really gets into this idea of what does choice or pro-choice really mean? Because one of the myths that you talk about is that women have the freedom to choose what they want to do with their body, when to have children, and with whom. And that is another one of those kind of emotional arguments that are supposed to tug at our hearts. But again, you remind us that when you talk about true choice, there's somebody in this equation that doesn't have a choice. Fair?
Exactly. And I think that they love to use the word choice because it sounds like such a nice word, and all of us are in favor of so many other choices. But when it comes to this choice, we're talking about the choice of someone to take away someone else's life, to take away someone else's future choices. And our choices really need to stop when they reach the next person. And I think that whenever I'm asked that, especially by libertarians who argue that, well, maybe we should have abortion because of this kind of woman's body, we'd have to say that, the government, the one time they really should intervene is when it comes to preventing killing, because that's why we have a state. And I think that when we're looking at another life, this life is not the woman's life. This is not her body that's going to be targeted and dismembered in this way. We're talking about an individual human being, an individual life. Then we have to say that that's really where our choice needs to stop.
Very good. Let's, if we can, just before we take a break, get into a couple of other issues. And one of those is you have whole sections, and we'll start it then and then pick it up a little bit after the break, between the idea of a positive good and the lesser of two evils. Now, I can remember I mentioned that one debate I was doing with an abortionist. I remember at one point the abortionist, even though he was kind of the leading abortionist in that state, nevertheless said, abortion is not a good thing. It's kind of the lesser of two evils. Women need to have access to it. But he really was sort of arguing that it's not a good thing, but it's a necessary thing. And over the time when I've found myself sometimes speaking at pregnancy resource centers and others, I began to point out that it used to be kind of the argument that abortion is kind of the lesser of two evils. It is something that maybe you're opposed to, but you don't have the right to force your views on somebody else. Certainly, abortion isn't something that we should try to have all the time. Even President Clinton at one point said that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. But then I've been pointing out in some of these various speeches that I've given that we've moved from a time in which abortion was seen as kind of the lesser of two evils to the fact that it might be even a greater good. And I want to come back after the break and talk about that, because you have a whole section in this book talking about how today more and more of the sort of pro-abortion forces are trying to say that it isn't the lesser of two evils, but it's actually good. It empowers women. It is a very important issue. And so then we'll get into the other side of that coin, not only that it's a positive good, but the lesser of two evils, and then some of the final arguments in the book. If you find yourself wanting to know more about this book, it no doubt will show up in your local bookstore, but also we have made it quite easy for you to order it. It's available both in hardback and Kindle, and we are privileged to have with us today Danielle D'Souza Gill. It is called The Choice, The Abortion Divide in America. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more about her, maybe have her come and speak. When we come back from the break, we'll talk about what is available on her website, which is also at our website, and it will give you a little bit more opportunity to contact her and find out more, not only about this book, but her earlier book as well. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Danielle D'Souza Gill. The book is entitled The Choice, The Abortion Divide in America. And just for a moment, I thought, Danielle, we might also talk about what is available at your website, because this is a place where, of course, we also have this on our website, where people can follow you on Twitter and Facebook and a variety of others. But this is also an opportunity for people to get a copy of the book if they'd like, to see some of the reviews, learn a little bit more about you, if they would like to schedule you to speak or maybe have you do some media. There are all sorts of great resources right there at the website. But real quickly, talk about what you have made available on your website in case people would like to contact you or learn a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely. People can contact me on my website. They can find out a little bit more about me, follow me on different social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Parler, all of the places.
And so, again, that is all available at our website. It's DanielleD'SouzaGill.com. And if you find yourself saying, I'm not sure how to spell all that, the good news is we have a link on our website. Okay, I kind of set you up for the last half hour here. A positive good and then the lesser of two evils. Let's talk about this idea of positive of good. Abortion is necessary in order for women to fully control their own bodies. Without abortion, women don't have reproductive freedom or equality. We're hearing, Danielle, a lot about reproductive rights, reproductive equality. And so in some respects, that chapter is an attempt to try to address that kind of cliche, that kind of statement that is being made more and more every single day, isn't it?
Yes, it really goes hand in hand with the idea that abortion empowers women. It allows them to do better in their careers. It allows them to achieve their dreams, all of these things. And I think this is what we hear most often today from a lot of celebrities on the left, like Michelle Williams, who, when she accepted her Golden Globe Award, said she wouldn't be in that place where she was if it hadn't been for her right to choose. And so I think that many younger women see this and think, well, maybe I have to get an abortion in order to be like that person. And I think that that's one of the biggest myths that the left is really selling in Hollywood and in magazines. And I think because they glamorize abortion and make it seem like it's this great, amazing thing, that's why so many women then find themselves very disappointed to realize that it doesn't actually deliver what the left promises them, this kind of shiny award and so on. But I think that if we actually look at that and see, is that true? Is that the reality? Well, the reality is actually that a lot of things that help women are having a family structure and having, a home where they're able to raise children, perhaps work also, and so on. But the left really has this goal of breaking down the nuclear family, of making it so that men are not responsible for being fathers and men are not encouraged to be part of that. They're completely left out of this abortion debate, the decision to raise this child. They don't want the woman to talk to her partner, talk to her parents, talk to her friends or a pastor and so on. They just want her to go directly to the abortion clinic and discuss it with the abortionist. And I think just this whole idea that empowerment, this idea of power even, is something to use in a way to harm another person is really a misuse of the word empowerment and of the word power, because we should not be using our power to harm other people, but to help other people.
And again, in your chapter that deals with that idea of empowerment, I mean, you've got a campaign called Shout Your Abortion. You have a movement called Thank God for Abortion. And then you have all sorts of situations. One that you mentioned there, 26 celebrities share their abortion stories to help end the stigma. But you go on to talk about the fact that this is all connected up to the idea of feminism, connected up to the idea of challenging patriarchy. So what about that? Because that is even broader than this idea of empowerment. And again, one of the reasons why I certainly want to recommend your book in the future, because you're really kind of taking on some of the newest ways in which abortion no longer is seen as kind of the lesser of two evils, but instead is seen as the greater good and really a very significant source of empowerment for young women.
Yes, I think that this idea that, all of these radical left feminists are even claiming that abortion somehow helps women is completely wrong. I think that the abortion industry actually really helps the patriarchy more than anything, because it actually allows men to basically live in this kind of casual sex-free lifestyle and really use women as sex objects. And then women are then basically given a couple $100 by this guy, go and then are left to, go through this surgical abortion, have to deal with then the emotional fallout of that perhaps for many years. And meanwhile, he goes on with his life doing this to other women. So I think that if we were to actually have a culture of life as opposed to this kind of, horrible circle, then we would actually have men that are really uplifting women and are also good fathers and good people in society and so on. So I think it would actually help women a lot if we did not have this culture of abortion.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Since you were talking about men, I thought we might go to this first call here, and that is Loretta. And Loretta from South Carolina, I think you had a comment to join us with today.
Well, what has happened is men don't seem to realize that they have completely lost their reproductive rights. The woman they impregnate has every right to destroy their child. And there's nothing a man can legally do about it.
What about that?
They have supported this. They've supported this, voted for it, passed it in state legislatures and federal legislatures.
Sure.
Okay, guys.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see if we can. What would you say at this point, Danielle, about that? Because that's kind of a key issue too, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a chapter that kind of goes into that. More men who are wanting to raise their children and wanting to be part of their child's life and so on, and would be willing to do so, even if the woman is not really willing to raise the child. And these men have really been not only legally pushed out, but also socially and really demonized by the left. The left really demonizes men who are pro-life and makes it seem like they want to control women's bodies and all of this, when in reality, many of them just want to do the right thing. And the guys who actually are in favor of abortion and who join the pro-choice side, those guys are actually the ones who are the shady characters.
Wow. Just before we take a break, though, let me get maybe one of the others. This one sort of fits in any category, but you put it under the section of the positive. Planned Parenthood is not primarily an abortion organization. It's a women's health organization. I think we've addressed that before, but it is amazing how many times you have that statement being made, and the argument is, no, none of the money that taxpayers pay is going to Planned Parenthood. But again, to use a if you will, accounting term, money is fungible. If I'm not spending it here in the abortion clinic, okay, but I'm spending it somewhere else so I can spend more money there. But when you look at Planned Parenthood, it is very definitely making its money off of abortion, isn't it?
Absolutely. This idea that it performs all of these other services is actually completely off base, because it counts every service they perform, like giving someone an exam, giving someone a birth control, and so on. They can count all of that as the equivalent of a surgical procedure, which is how they're able to make it seem like the percentage of abortions they do is small. But if we look at the number of abortions they actually perform per year, it's in the hundreds of thousands, usually upward of 300,000. So they're the largest abortion provider in the country. And so this idea that they're somehow not in the abortion business is factually incorrect.
Let's, if we can, also get into maybe one of the kind of lesser of two evils. You're going to hear people saying, well, I'm personally opposed to abortion, but I really don't have the right to force my beliefs on someone else. I see that showing up, especially with the younger generation. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a clever argument, and a lot of people used to make that argument, like Mario Cuomo in New York and some other Democrats who kind of tried to seem like they weren't, radically pro-choice. But we've actually seen that argument kind of dwindle away. But I actually hear this argument more often now from Christians who tend to maybe fall more on the side of the left and so on, and kind of justify that by using this argument. But I would say that if you are saying that you're personally pro-life, why would you even say you're personally pro-life? What is the reason for that? And if they would say, well, I believe it's taking a life or it's killing, then I would say that there's no way that you could just keep that as a personal thing because of what you're saying you think it is. And I think if you kind of dive into that more with that person, you realize that they don't actually really care about it that much. They don't actually really believe it's killing, but it's kind of just a way for them to sort of morally have a pass. But I think that if we even look at this idea of not imposing your views on another person, that is kind of a cop-out because we always impose our views on other people. That's really what laws are. And when we vote, we have no choice but to impose our views. And in this case, we are imposing our views on the child with its life or death.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. If you just joined us, we're talking with Danielle D'Souza Gill. The book is entitled The Choice, The Abortion Divide in America. 21 very important myths that she critiques. We have covered quite a number, but of course, the best way to read them all is to get the book. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Danielle D'Souza Gill. And again, the book is entitled The Choice, The Abortion Divide in America. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to California, KYCC. Sarah, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
I am so thrilled that I was able to get through to you guys because I have to go to work. But my point is this about abortion, is that God's the creator. There is nothing that exists that God did not create. God created my body as well as everybody else's. And God also created the child within the womb. And what irks me the most are people, probably you don't believe in God anyway, who say, I have a right to do what I want to with my body. Well, from my perspective, It's not your body, nor is that child within you your body. Everything belongs to God. So, got my 2 cents in.
That was good. I'll take those 2 cents anytime. Really, Danielle, that's kind of the idea that we come from a Christian point of view. But even apart from that, I think biologically we could at least take the second part of that and have most people, even if they don't believe in God, at least acknowledge that the biology of the developing child inside the womb is biologically different than the biology of the mother. And this argument that it's just like an appendix or something like that is just really bad biology, isn't it?
Exactly. They always use that analogy of the appendix or the gallbladder or so on to kind of show that, look, this is an organ, but it's not a vital organ. And the reality is the child is not an organ. It's an organism that is a complete entity in and of itself. And if we look at the fact that it has its own organs, it has its own toes, its own head, its own fingernails, all of these things in the first trimester, this is not the equivalent of any of those things scientifically.
Let's, if we can, take another phone call. We'll head out to South Carolina real quickly on the Good News Network. Dave, I think you have a question for us.
Yes, sir. Hi, Danielle. Love your dad. Great man. What about demographics and ethnicities? How are abortions broken down in the U.S.? And also, if I may, other than women's empowerment, do you think there's a more sinister reason? I think we do, but I mean, do you have anything like as far as population control, things like that? Thanks very much, and God bless you.
Okay. Yeah, again, we did mention Planned Parenthood just a minute ago. The founder of Planned Parenthood was a woman by the name of Margaret Sanger. Anybody that's watched one of your father's films knows that he's gone into some detail with Margaret Sanger. And of course, when we've had Alveda King, who's endorsing your book, she's talked about that as well. So what about some of the background for this whole issue of abortion and how that relates to eugenics and race and things of that nature?
Yeah, absolutely. The idea that this abortion movement originated out of right to privacy or women's empowerment or the suffrage movement or any of that is totally wrong. It originated out of the eugenics movement. A woman named Margaret Sanger, who founded Planned Parenthood, did so that she could eradicate what she called human weeds. And so this was kind of her idea of creating a perfect society and making it so that anyone who had a disability was gotten rid of, anyone who had some kind of background of poverty, their race, whatever the reason is. And I think that we've kind of seen that transition into the population control movement. And that was really what was talked about a lot regarding even what's happening today with Bill Gates and all of these people. They claim that they're worried about population control, and meanwhile they are in favor of sterilization and so on. So they really kind of use this population control as kind of just a cover for eugenics. They actually mean eugenics, but they know that they can't say that they're in favor of eugenics. But who does this actually target the most? And of course, we see them targeting many people in third world countries. And here, Planned Parenthood targets people who live in minority communities. They definitely target the Black community. More Black babies are in some cities aborted than born. More Black babies are aborted than white babies. And we even see this also affect gender. We see that there are some people who unfortunately wait to find out the gender of their baby and then say, oh, this isn't the one that I wanted, so I'm going to get an abortion to try again or something. And so that's why we have more baby girl babies aborted than baby boy babies, especially in countries like China. So this is definitely an issue of racism, of sexism, and very targeted eugenics. And unfortunately, the marketing that Planned Parenthood uses is really just intended to cover its eugenics goals by making it seem like it's about empowerment, when in reality it is about really disempowering a lot of people in our society.
Just before we run out of time, let's talk about how people can use this book. And in some respects, we've only covered some of the 21 different myths, and that is a good reason for people to buy the book, put it on your shelf, and then oftentimes you will dip into one chapter or the other, although I would highly recommend for many of you to maybe take the time and read it all the way through cover to cover. And if you find yourself saying, well, how do I know that's true? Danielle, let me just give you credit for the fact that you have 350 endnotes. So, again, this is so well documented. And, again, the reason why I, in future booklets, when we talk about abortion or other places, will recommend your book is because you are taking on some of the newer, if you will, themes, myths, slogans, and in some respects, it was a book that needed to be written, and I really appreciate you writing it. But how can people use this book? Because I think it is certainly one that people can read through. The way you've put it together, it could even be a small group study, and of course, you've got all sorts of documentation in case individuals find themselves in some kind of interaction, whether it's streetwise, maybe on the streets and talking to an abortion-minded woman going to an abortion clinic. Maybe it's using that in terms of social media. You really intended this to be a resource so that you can use it in all sorts of different venues, didn't you?
Exactly, and I think that's why I wanted to organize it based on each myth, because that's really what the culture puts forward, that's what the left is putting forward, and so we have to know how to respond to each of these. And I think a lot of us who are pro-life might have, one or two main reasons we're pro-life, but I think we have to really be equipped on all of these arguments, just because we never know what someone might ask us about, what a friend might bring up, and so on. And so if we bring them to kind of this other point that they then maybe don't agree with us on, we're not able to answer what they asked about, we're kind of missing an opportunity there. So that's why I really want to organize it. So if someone is wondering, well, what about this idea of, a child becoming a criminal if they were likely to be aborted and so on? Okay, well, I'll go to that chapter and find out what I can see there. And of course, you can jump to the footnotes and so on. But yeah, I really wanted to make it very accessible so that any pro-lifer would be equipped, and any pro-choicer reading this would see that I really took on all of their most popular comments.
And a lot of them have to do with the idea that, well, we shouldn't force a woman to carry out a pregnancy she doesn't want to, or what about, the hard cases, rape, incest, life of the mother. Of course, this is one of the places where I want to again salute those of you in pregnancy resource centers, because you can say, if you say, I can't carry this child, I don't want to keep this child, well, we can provide opportunities for you to give it up for adoption, or if you're not sure you can keep the child, we want to come alongside you and address some of those issues. So, Danielle, just an outstanding book. It is one that we will recommend. I'm going to use it for various commentaries and maybe list it in the next version of our abortion booklet. And so thank you for taking the time to write it, and thank you for giving us an hour today here on Point of View.
Well, it was my absolute honor. Thank you for having me on the show, and I really enjoyed this deep dive discussion into many of the different myths.
Well, again, we're going to take a break, and if you would like to get some more information, it is all available on our website, pointofview.net. We also have a link to Danielle D'Souza Gill's website, and you can find all of that on the website at pointofview.net. 21 different myths, the slogans and phrases that you hear so often, and how do I respond to those? And she has done such an incredible job of not only giving you some very good answers, but also taking the time to really give you a number of footnotes so that you will be very articulate in your answer. And you've been listening to Point of View.
Election day has come and gone, so tell me, do people like you need to be more or less vigilant, more or less informed, more or less involved in making an impact? I think the answer is clear. Those who value freedom of conscience and religious liberty need to do more than ever to stand up for what the founders gave us and put America on track for greatness. Yes, we face challenges, but it's in the hard times that the greatest victories are seized and won. I urge you today, right now, to seize this opportunity and join the Point of View Radio Truth Team. Be part of the solution our nation needs. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The election is not the end of anything. It's another beginning. And when you join the Truth Team, you make it possible for millions of people to get the real news they desperately need and the practical marching orders that Kerby and the team at Point of View Radio give each day. Join us now in this critical moment. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to talk about the fact that not only do we have one vaccine for the coronavirus, now a second one, so we'll get into that. Also, what is the status of some of the lawsuits that the Trump campaign is bringing on the issue of the election? What about the Dominion voting systems that has been in the news over the weekend? And we're going to talk about all of that. But just before we do so, this last hour we had Danielle D'Souza Gill on the program, and I have one leftover call that I thought would be very helpful to hear. It is from Lila in Georgia, and I believe she had an abortion a number of years ago, but wants to talk about the impact of that. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, thank you for letting me just have a minute. I just wanted to say that so many times when I listen to the debate about abortion or it's being presented, it's always freedom of choice. And I think one myth is we're all interrelated, and it affects more than the woman. It affects her future children. And I have two daughters and one son, and my son is, an adult, and he is forever saying, I just feel like I just wish I had someone, another male figure that I was close to in the family. Of course, he's close to his father, his cousins, but that, the question, what if it had been a boy? What would that relationship have been like? And so that's really what I wanted to say.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And I've had, for example, another example of that. Sometimes the kids have said to one individual that I knew, Mom, why did you hate your birthday? You just always were so difficult around your birthday. And she hadn't really thought it through, and then realized, well, I'd had an abortion on my birthday. And so the kids were even picking up some of the nonverbals from the mother. So anybody that thinks that abortion is just a one-time event and it has no impact in the future, it really does. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm going to keep moving on. And if you would like to join us on some of these other topics, that is the case. But again, one of the best questions is, what is better than one vaccine against the coronavirus? Oh, it might be two vaccines against the coronavirus, and this one seems to be even more effective. Pfizer, of course, announced just the other day that their particular vaccine is probably 90% effective, and yet here now Moderna, which we've talked about before, has a vaccine that's 94.5% effective, and the good news in that regard is, whereas the Pfizer vaccine has to be kept at a very cold temperature, dry ice and other things, this new one can actually be stored in regular refrigerator temperatures. And so between both Pfizer and Moderna, maybe 60 million doses of the vaccine might be ready by the end of the year. Both the vaccines require 2 doses, so it might be you would take one in December and one in January. But again, that is kind of the good news. But while we're talking about that, I thought I would address something we mentioned just the other day in passing, but that is, did Pfizer wait till after the election to announce the good news? And the answer seems to be very clearly yes. That they knew back in October that this was successful, and yet they have tried to repeatedly distance themselves from the Trump administration's what's called Operation Warp Speed. And when the Pfizer announcement came, you know, the first person to get the phone call? It was Joe Biden, not the president, not even the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And if you look at some of the other facts, you can see maybe why. Back in the early days of the Trump administration, Donald Trump hosted a group of pharmaceutical executives, part of what are called Big Pharma, in the White House and told them we have to lower drug prices. To his credit, President Trump signed 4 different executive orders with the intent of cutting prescription drug prices. And yet, if you remember, we did announce the fact that the Pfizer vaccine, as it began its trials, the Trump administration then actually entered into an advanced purchasing agreement for $1.95 billion for 100 million doses of the vaccine. And yet, interestingly enough, the senior vice president for Pfizer, that'd be Katherine Jensen, said, "We were never part of Warp Speed. We have never taken any money from the U.S. government or from anyone." That's a good example of something that is very misleading. Some of you might even call it a lie, because first of all, it is true that Pfizer never took federal funds to research the vaccine, but the statement is really in contradiction with the previous public announcements of how Operation Warp Speed enabled them to speed up the production of the vaccine. And of course, they also, as I mentioned a minute ago, entered into the advanced purchasing agreement. So I think it's pretty clear that Pfizer has been doing all it can to try to really distance itself from the Trump administration. And if nothing else, you then had a statement by Joe Biden, because he actually was able to announce this before some of the people even knew about that, including the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary Azar, who said, "I heard about it in the media, not through Pfizer themselves." Lest you wonder that's all just coincidence, it turns out that there is a website you can go to called opensecrets.org, and you can find out that, assuming these are accurate, and there's no reason to doubt that, interestingly enough, all sorts of individuals donated to Joe Biden's campaign to the order of $256,000 in campaign contributions. You might say, well, did they contribute to the Trump campaign? Yeah, about $62,000. So I think you can see some very interesting issues there. But nevertheless, just thought I would point that out. Anybody that wondered about why they waited till 6 days after the election and 2 days after the media declared Joe Biden the president-elect, I think there was something to that timing as well. We come back from the break, though. I want to get into what about some of these lawsuits here. And one of the pieces that you can read is Andrew McCarthy talking about the fact that a lot of time and attention was spent on a couple of lawsuits that, quite frankly, probably would make very little difference. For example, one of those is a case that might even go to the Supreme Court out of Pennsylvania, which would, again, was an attempt to try to disallow some of those ballots that came in after November 3rd. Remember, we've talked about on this program that there was a decision by the Supreme Court not to decide that case, and yet it seemed to be in a clear violation where a judge say, oh, yeah, these ballots can come in after the election and still be counted. But even if you were to disallow those votes, as we'll talk about after the break, it wouldn't have made any difference in terms of the election there in Pennsylvania. So I want to talk about that. And then we've posted some very good articles, one that talks about some of the curious ways in which some of these particular cities are places where Joe Biden underperformed Hillary Clinton, except in these 4 cities. And then what about this whole issue of Dominion software? We'll get to that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We're often told to trust the experts, and that is good advice when you're dealing with a true expert. I want a plumbing expert in my house if I have a water leak. I want a doctor with medical expertise doing surgery on me, and I want a trained pilot flying the plane I'm taking from one city to another. No, I'm talking about experts who don't really know the real world, but often have great power in the media and politics to control you. That was illustrated the other day in a tweet from David Brooks, who writes for the New York Times. The day after the election, he admitted that the media got their predictions all wrong. He said, "Pretty massive failure. We still are not good at capturing the right word half of the country." People in the media, along with professors in the university and politicians and bureaucrats in government, really don't understand you. Yet they have enormous power to influence your views and to control your lives. It reminded me of the test Charles Murray put together years ago to measure how thick is your bubble. He found that people who live in a bubble isolated from the world can be found in New York City, Silicon Valley, Los Angeles, and the suburbs around Washington, D.C. These are the media experts who determine what you read, hear, and see in the news media, social media, and entertainment. They are also powerful people in government who pass laws and write regulations that control your lives. There are two lessons we should learn here. First, don't be like them. Sometimes it can be fairly easy for us as Christians to retreat inside our own bubble, read articles and watch programs done by people who are not like you. But the second and most important lesson is don't always trust the judgment of some of these experts. They may be very disconnected from your world and don't see it the way you see it. Trust your own judgment. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
But once again, one of the things that Andrew McCarthy does is really help us kind of cut through some of these various lawsuits. And perhaps the most significant one, as I just mentioned a minute ago, which was supposed to go to the Supreme Court, had to do with what happened in Pennsylvania, in which you have about 10,000 votes or 10,000 ballots that came in after the election. But the point that he makes is that still doesn't help the campaign, because Donald Trump was trailing, at least has been trailing, Joe Biden by about 55,000 votes in Pennsylvania. And he says it's anything but clear that even those 10,000 late arriving votes are all Biden votes. But even if you assume that they are, okay, and I don't, 55,000 minus 10,000 is 45,000. So it still doesn't bring you where you need to be. And he said there's always been a mismatch between the impropriety alleged and the remedy that it could yield. And so, again, the point he's making is that's not to say that there wasn't a lack of voter irregularities. There are some really significant concerns about voter fraud. And as another individual even pointed out recently, even if this is still in, if you will, the Hail Mary territory, it still is recognizing that pursuing some of this is a valid exercise, because if people get away with voter fraud this time, you think they might want to do it again? Of course. So it's not just about this election, it's about the next election. One of the articles I've posted for you to read is by Matt Vespa, in which he actually makes the case by quoting from an individual by the name of Richard Barris, the same argument that was made on Friday by Lathan Watts, and that is the fact that you have a significant number of places where the turnout, let's take Wisconsin, for example, is at 89%. Kimberly Strassel did the math and said that would require about 900,000 people showing up for same-day registrations. That doesn't work. But the one that Lathan Watts was really spending some time talking about is what Richard Barris points out. He's with Big Data Poll, in which he says if you look at Joe Biden's numbers in most of the other cities and most of the other areas, he's underperformed Hillary Clinton in almost every city compared to 4 years ago, with the exception of 4 cities: Milwaukee, Detroit, Atlanta, and Philadelphia. That's significant because, as Barris points out, Trump won the largest non-white vote share for a Republican candidate in 60 years. Biden underperformed Hillary Clinton in every major metro area around the country, save for Milwaukee, Detroit, Atlanta, and Philadelphia. And so if you go back and look at some of the victories by Donald Trump 4 years ago in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, you can see that he was still pretty much on target to win those states until about the middle of night, where the counting was arbitrarily halted. Then he goes on to say, miraculously, several 100,000 votes, all for Biden, were mysteriously found, and Trump's lead subsequently vanished. So, again, there is a question being raised about what might have happened there. But a lot of the time and attention now is focused on Dominion voting systems, and in particular, Dominion voting systems and Smartmatic. And I have given you both a point-counterpoint on this. The point is attorney Sidney Powell, who's been on this program before. You might remember her, was on last time, I think, with Dr. Merrill Matthews, because she was the attorney working for Michael Flynn and helping him. She was on the Fox News Sunday morning features, in which she was arguing that Dominion voting systems is flawed, that it has been utilized in about 2,000 different jurisdictions in about 30 states. By the way, the state of Texas decided not to use the Dominion system because they were convinced that it could be used for fraud. The chairman of the board is an individual who is on Vice President Joe Biden's transition team. And so Sidney Powell said on Fox the other day, "We're fixing to overturn the election results in multiple states, and President Trump won by not just hundreds of thousands of votes, but millions of votes that were shifted by this software that was designed expressly for that purpose." She went on to say, "We have sworn witness testimony about why the software was designed, and it was designed to rig elections." Now, that's a pretty outrageous statement. You would hope that she could back it up. She even later on said, "I never say anything I can't prove." Well, I hope so, because this is kind of blockbuster type of material, and made the argument that this system has been used to rig elections in other countries, and that some of those tactics have been used here. She said, I never say anything I can't prove. Secondly, the evidence is coming in so fast I can't even process it. Millions of Americans have written by now. I would say definitely hundreds of thousands have stepped forward with their different experiences of voter fraud. But this is massive election fraud, she said, and I'm very concerned. It not only involved Dominion and Smartmatic software, but the software is essentially used in other election machines as well. She went on to simply say that the user's manual talks about how votes can be wiped away, and it was brazen how people bought this system and then used it, and how it could, in some respects, invalidate maybe the presidential race but not affect down ballot. It's like drag and drop, and those are kind of arguments she was made. But again, this is pretty outrageous kind of claims, and again, it doesn't matter what you or I think about it. Can it be proven in a court of law? Because it gets to another article that we have. Jenna Ellis points out, as the senior advisor for the Trump campaign, that the states need to certify these elections. Now, to put it in perspective, a number of states today have already certified the election totals in their states. Now, none of those states include the battleground states that we oftentimes are talking about here, but by next Monday, at least 2 of those states are supposed to certify those elections. And so Jenna Ellis says we need to have an audit of this, and this is something that, of course, is going to change the national outcome of the election. You think? If indeed it's true. But she goes on to say it's a feature where they're able to take votes that are cast for President Trump and change them to Joe Biden. She pointed out that these machines come from Dominion, which was founded in Venezuela, which is kind of interesting. Then they'll be able to add ballots, count ballots multiple times, and that's the feature there. Well, again, really outrageous claims. If indeed they're true, they would put this election in a very serious question. But to be fair, I also posted a very good article that appeared in USA Today arguing that these voting machines did not delete votes or switch votes. So you have both a point and a counterpoint on that. But it doesn't really matter what you and I believe. It's what you can prove in a court of law or can prove to the states, which by next week are going to be certifying some of these votes in some of these swing states. Already, some of these votes in Virginia, a variety of other places, have already been certified. And that brings me to one other point I wanted to make before we do our interview with Brian Sumner. And that is, if you're out on the internet, especially on Facebook, you probably have seen some claim, and it's a false report. So I wanted to help you understand that if you see this, don't pass it on, don't believe it. But it was something which said that the U.S. Army raided the offices of the software company associated with Dominion, both in, I think it was supposed to be in Frankfurt, Germany, and also in Barcelona. And that actually began because of a Zoom call that involved an individual that's been on this program with us before, Representative Louis Gohmert, which was then spread by George Papadopoulos, who's also been on this program, arguing that indeed the U.S. Army was seizing the servers for the Dominion voting surface in Germany. But when the Army was asked about that, they said, no, we have never engaged in an operation to recover servers in Germany. We didn't do this in Frankfurt. We didn't do this in Barcelona. And the story just sort of got out of hand, but it's a good example of one where people that we appreciate, like Louis Gohmert and others, made a statement. Even at the time, his statement was, I don't know the truth. I just got this tweet from those in Germany. And it's court of had a life of its own. And that, of course, is just a reason to check things out, because this false rumor spread all the way through the internet before truth even could get its boots on, to paraphrase an old phrase. And so if you see that particular false story, delete it, don't pass it on. But we will continue to follow what's going on here with the Dominion voting systems. But I wanted you to hear of both a point and counterpoint, one that argued that these voting systems did delete or switch votes, and another argument that they did not delete the votes and did not switch them. And so there you have both sides of that conversation. But when we come back, we're going to spend some time talking with Brian Sumner. You may have seen some of his I Am Second videos. He's also part of a film called I Hated, and we'll talk about that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, we're going to talk about hate and the power of the gospel. And if you have ever watched any of the I Am Second videos, you may remember one from 10 years ago. Hard to believe I looked it up 10 years ago. Brian Sumner, incredible story that he told at that time. And now they've put it together at our friends at I Am Second into a film called I Hated, in which you have a number of individuals, David Mann, Ashley Rawls, of course, Brian Sumner, Ken Hutcherson, and Jessica Long, in which they tell the stories, some of which we've seen before. And if you're not familiar with Brian Sumner, you perhaps have seen the I Am Second video. If not, maybe you've seen the movie Foolishness or even seen his book Never Fails. Those of you that love skateboarding certainly know him because he was an individual who was transplanted to America after being born in England and became part of Tony Hawk's Birdhouse Skateboards and became really part of the skating community in a way that was very significant. And then when he's married his wife. If you've heard his testimony before, then they end up fighting, getting depressed, divorced, all sorts of things. Then eventually coming across the book, The Case for Christ, from our good friend Lee Strobel, and that changed everything in which he came to faith. Of course, today he's an evangelist, a pastor, a speaker, and an individual that we welcome to the microphone today. So, Brian, thank you so very much for joining us today here on Point of View.
How are you guys doing? So blessed to be with you guys. Thank you.
Well, blessed to have your story. And again, I know you've probably told the story so many times, but for the listeners that maybe have never seen your I Am Second video or are going to be interested in getting the I Hated film, can you give us at least a little bit of a background? Because it's an incredible story of success. But when you reach to the very top of the ladder of success, you realize it's leaning against the wrong wall, and nothing seemed to fulfill your life, even though you were kind of a skateboarder's dream, weren't you?
Yeah, growing up in Liverpool, England, home of the Beatles, very loving city, coming out of that whole kind of, unemployment down the docks, a lot of heart. But growing up there, it's amazing to think I never really heard about God. I had a couple of Mormon, Jehovah's Witness friends, some Muslim friends, but we're mostly just unbelievers. And my life changed at about the age of 13 when I picked up a skateboard, fell in love with it. And fortunately, skateboarding was blowing up. I was invited to America around 15, 16 to ride for these big companies. The whole thing took off. Now you're making, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And I guess I'd say to you, I'm living the American dream. But biblically, I was gaining the whole world, losing my soul. And skating gives you just enough amount of fame to know that you're getting all that you want and you need, but that there's something missing. So at 19, 20, as you said earlier, falling in love, married this girl, had every intention of doing this right, no infidelity, pursuing each other, but without God. You go into that 2 years in with a beautiful son. Before long, you're fighting. Before long, there's issues. Before long, you're divorced. And now I'm depressed and angry because life had worked out just rosy. And now I'm separated from the woman I love. We don't want to be together. And I looked up to God and said, I'm going to prove you're not real, because if you're not real, then I'm just roadkill. If someone didn't create me, I just evolved anyway. I'm just mush. I'm the possum you're going to run over today. And through that journey of being angry and hurt and fight or flight, kind of, Liverpool kind of puts that in you. You flee from everything or you run towards it with anger. I came to faith. I ended up looking at all the different faiths, opening up the Bible, and right there in Genesis 1, God says, let us make man. That is me, Brian, the younger man, in our image. Well, God, if I'm made in your image, why does my life suck? Why am I divorced? Why is the pain? Why is the cancer? Why is the corona? Whatever you are today, guys, listening, why? And as I began to read the pages of the Bible, God unpacked that. They fell in the garden, the earth is cursed, but God sent his son, things I'd never heard. And so fast forward a few months, as you alluded to, Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ, I read that while having community service and anger management, which is crazy, and came to faith. witness to my ex-wife. She came to faith 3 weeks later after, telling me I was crazy. I wasn't Catholic. You've never even been baptized. You and basically Adolf Hitler, you're probably going to hell. But she's seen a change in me. God got a hold of me. And now you fast forward, since 2004, my son's now 20 and possibly moving out in the next few weeks to get married. Wow. My daughter's 13 and my son is 10. And basically God has done a work and is doing a work. And to your point, literally I believe one of the people who worked there was on the plane and they were asking someone about the project they were doing and, hey, we're doing these stories. And someone said to them, oh, there's a skateboarder that came to faith. And they mentioned me and Christian Asoy. And then I Am Second got a hold of me. We did the video. It went everywhere across the middle of America. And to this day, it's one of the things I'm most recognized for. And I'm thankful for that because it's opened all these doors now for us to do. I mean, even as you called me, I was posting this morning about marriage, about anger, because amidst this whole season, even while you're putting this out, people need to hear of God's grace and mercy and about how he's in charge regardless of what we see in the world that's passing by. So,
and I might just mention, too, that this film, first of all, pulls out that great interview of you 10 years ago, which was so well done. But then it brings in some other individuals. I've known Ken Hendrickson when he was alive. And it's the whole issue of hate. I hate men. I hate my body. I hate my marriage. I hate other races. A time when there's so much hate, Brian, this is, I think, a film that needed to be done. And it pulls together some of the previous I Am Second videos, puts them all together in a way that I think is going to be very helpful and useful for people in ministry, don't you think?
Yeah, because if you think about life, I went into my marriage relating to this person. That's what a relationship is. You relate. I relate by buying her nice things. I mean, just taking her to eat, telling her she's pretty, hanging out together. That's how your marriage is developed. Now you get a bit older, you have the kids, your boss is chewing you out, the diapers smell. Now you're relating in the negative. People don't aim to hate. Somewhere in their life, there was a pain, there was a hurt, there was a lack of love. You could be talking about anything. And in this day and age, there's division, there's frustration, and we're going off emotion. I mean, and the media has definitely, weaponized this idea regardless of who becomes the president, regardless of what happens. There's so much hate in a world that God doesn't see color the way we do. We should celebrate our differences. We all have the same color blood running through us. We're all Imago Dei, made in his image. But people are hurt, they're afraid, they're wounded, whether that's to do with the politics or COVID, whether it's to do with just this season of just frustration. People absolutely need to hear that the way of hate does not bring life. And the opposite of that, of course, we know is love. I still go through things. I still face hard times. But the Bible says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. And we're not called to hate anyone. So for God so loved the world that he sent Jesus, so we likewise should be living that same thing out. People that are hurting should jump into those videos, see where their pain and hurt is, and allow, that video practically, and then ultimately the Lord himself to get a hold of the life and begin to restore. Yeah.
One of the things that we are providing is an opportunity for people to not only go to the iamsecond.com and they can find the film I Hated. They can also see the individual ones, but we also have a link to your Facebook page, your Twitter post, your website, and a number of other things because you're still available for speaking. I know we're all kind of shut down right now in COVID, and you're out there in California where it really is shut down even more than it is where some of our listeners in 3 other states aren't, but there's going to be a great opportunity for people to bring you in and talk about this issue of anger and hate, and I see that as a real ministry, don't you?
Yeah, because, what do you do with a guy that's at the top of his game as a skater? And here's the thing a lot of people don't realize. They say the 2 most influential things in America today is skateboarding and music. So while I was at the top of my game coming to faith, obviously God was more focused on restoring my marriage than just my career. So we wrote the book on how not to be married, but then God, obviously writing the Bible, told us how to have a solid marriage. So what that did was took me as a pro skater. My life became flying. I didn't want to be a speaker. I didn't think I was a pastor. I didn't even know what the Bible was about. And then my life became flying into somewhere, speaking at a youth event Thursday, doing a marriage conference Friday, speaking at a church on Sunday, doing an outreach on Saturday. And this is just the way God made me, I guess, traveling the world as a skateboarder and now as an evangelist. So for me, I raised full-time support. I guess I'm an urban missionary. Our church got behind me and said, Brian, these doors keep opening. And so for me, I'm just like, Lord, as long as you keep using things like this interview, the I Am Second, the door to open, a pulpit to fill, a rehab to go speak at a school, university. I mean, I wouldn't put that lifestyle on anyone else, but like Charles Spurgeon said, if you can do anything else, do it. This is my life right now. So, yeah.
Let's take a break. We will continue our conversation with Brian Sumner right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Brian Sumner with us for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that we have a link to iamsecond.com, and you can go and find the link that we have there to I Hated. There's a trailer which is about 30 seconds long, so you could show that to individuals. The actual film itself is only 10 minutes long, and it's something I think you will benefit from. Of course, you can go and watch all the individual interviews there as well. But Brian, let's talk about this issue of hate, especially among young boys. I've heard both Jim Dobson and Josh McDowell say that if there's one thing you can assume, it is young boys today have anger issues. And it seems to me that because of that, this is even more important than it was, say, a decade ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, see, the Bible talks about it in a way where it's not sin to be angry. Jesus had anger, but how you act out, that's where the issue comes from. So if it's really true that 80% of men in prison are there because they didn't have a father or a situation in their life, they're angry, and rather than knowing what to do with it, as they lash out, they're ended up in prison. Whether that's going to a substance, to medicate, whether that's taking out a spouse or their own children. I mean, the world is frustrating. We're going to face things every day. I did jiu-jitsu this morning for an hour and got attacked by about, 30 of my good friends. That could make me angry. But rightly focused, I say, Lord, I'm living in this fallen world. How do these young men now realize they're made in God's image? And how do we take that anger and help them understand this is why you're feeling this? We've got to aim it in the right ways, which I don't think we've done a good job of that in schools necessarily, though many people have tried, or even with what the media stirs up. So, yeah, a lot of prayer and a lot of important time spent with our youth is what's necessary. That's a lot of the ministry I do after speaking, preaching, traveling, is sitting with the youth and unpacking my own struggles with anger to tell them this is normal to feel, but it's where you aim it. It's going to have a different result.
Very good. And again, people know you as an individual dealing with anger management, but also we've come to know you as an individual that helps marriages. So share that, if you might, for a little bit, because God has really opened an opportunity for you and your wife, Tracy, hasn't he?
Yeah, well, we think about the Bible. It's the story of marriage. And you say, well, whoa, Brian, what do you mean? Genesis begins with a marriage. Revelation ends with one. And it's a story of a king called Jesus who came to slay a serpent, Satan, to redeem his bride. So the whole idea is about a man humbling himself to pursue his bride. And so for us, we looked at it like we had no clue what the Bible said. We had no understanding. I am convinced today that as we've kind of Americanized, or, in England, or just made a culture where we're Christian, we've missed a lot of just simply standing on the word. And that idea that who God brings together, let no man separate. If I really believe that, if I really believe love never fails, that even in my seasons of frustration, of anger, women are just as angry, only than a lot of times they're quiet and they go out and do something and then repent and ruin their lives, in a way. If we can just simply get back to what God's saying and understand the whole picture is about marriage. And I love, there's a word in the Hebrew, ahavah, and you get it out of Song of Songs, where it says, do not arouse or awaken love, ahavah, until it so desires. I daily need to wake up and put that love on my wife. Choose to do that. That's the same kind of love we hear about in the Greek in the New Testament, the agape, that God chooses to love you, chooses to love me, chooses to love our spouses. When I can do that daily, there shouldn't be a reason why that godly love ever fails. And I believe over time, as God promises, our marriages will grow. There'll be a bigger witness. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day anyway. So.
Yeah, let's, if we can, also point people to not only I Am Second, but briansumner.net, because there is a newsletter. There are all sorts of blog posts and other resources, and, of course, a way in which people can connect up with you. So what will people find when they land on your website?
My son, my 20-year-old, is currently redoing it, and so the goal is to have a page that's got, a marriage book's already there, but a bunch of marriage resources. The Foolishness podcast that I put out every week, it's got about 80 episodes, a lot of conversations on various topics. But ultimately, I try and really use social networking to connect with people. Am I going to see my friends back in England again? I don't know. Am I going to see the people I went into skate careers with all around the world? Sometimes. And now I've got ministry family. I try and be available online to pick up the phone to whoever, to connect with someone, to drop scriptures. We're living in a world where I believe the Apostle Paul would have redeemed all this stuff out there that the enemy is using for bad. So that website is a way to connect with me. Sure, invite me somewhere, but simply hear my story, see what God did, and I'm going to push a lot more resources in the near future there to hopefully encourage and bless people, and just to have a more full life, even when it's crazy, because God is good.
Well, again, we appreciate the work that you've done over these years. I encourage people to connect up with you. They have links to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and, of course, your website and I Am Second and a variety of other resources. So, Brian, appreciate your testimony. We had a chance to see it 10 years ago, and, boy, God has certainly used you in the interim, and wish you for the very best in the future.
Thanks, you guys. God bless you. Praying for the show. Amen.
Well, let's just before we take a break, mention some of the resources. And first of all, of course, we have the link to the book that we did the interview on last hour, The Choice, The Abortion Divide in America. And that is a very good piece that I think you're really going to appreciate as well, because Danielle D'Souza Gill is actually the author of that book. And so you'll find that is very helpful. We have some information about the votes, Biden underperforming except in 4 cities. We have the counterpoint on the Dominion voting system, that the voting system did delete votes and switch votes or did not. So I gave you both sides on that. And one other article, which we didn't really mention today, but it's the first article there, and that is the fact that we had a number of pro-Trump demonstrators in the nation's capital over the weekend, and they were attacked by Antifa, Black Lives Matter. I'm aware of all the attacks that were there, and this article here comes from the Daily Wire, pointing out that there were many people saying, okay, if indeed Joe Biden, you're the president-elect, and you were calling for us to have unity and healing, why is it we didn't see anything where you actually spoke to this issue? And so if you find this article, you'll see where Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri actually said, again, when is Joe Biden, Mr. Unity, going to condemn this violence of those who were being attacked? This particular video shows people that are Trump supporters who were being attacked when they were eating outside, being attacked with fireworks. Then Dana Lash has been on the program with us as well. She highlighted a video. This was a very different one. And she said, I'm sure that Biden will denounce this when all the press ask him about that. Of course, she knows that the press won't ask him about that. And then you have Richard Grinnell. This is BLM and Antifa, and they are Joe Biden supporters. Biden hasn't condemned them. Look at the videos. By the way, I wouldn't necessarily encourage you to watch all the videos, but if you're not familiar with the level of violence that came against some of those individuals who were wearing MAGA hats or had Trump flags or whatever, it illustrates again that we can talk about unity and we can talk about love, but we're not finding it necessarily in the streets, certainly in Washington, D.C. and other places as well. So all of those articles are available to you on pointofview.net. As a program note, let me mention tomorrow that George Barna will be with us, and we'll do kind of an evaluation of some of the worldview issues that are affecting our society. So that will be part of our conversation. Ben Corson will be with us as we get closer to Thanksgiving, talking about what we can be thankful for. And in between, I'm going to spend a fair amount of time just once again trying to get a sense of what is happening with these legal challenges, the recounts, and all the rest. So all of that will be taking place tomorrow. And I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. Go to pointofview.net, find these articles, and we'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Election day has come and gone, so tell me, do people like you need to be more or less vigilant, more or less informed, more or less involved in making an impact? I think the answer is clear. Those who value freedom of conscience and religious liberty need to do more than ever to stand up for what the founders gave us and put America on track for greatness. Yes, we face challenges, but it's in the hard times that the greatest victories are seized and won. I urge you today, right now, to seize this opportunity and join the Point of View Radio Truth Team. Be part of the solution our nation needs. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The election is not the end of anything. It's another beginning. And when you join the Truth Team, you make it possible for millions of people to get the real news they desperately need and the practical marching orders that Kerby and the team at Point of View Radio give each day. Join us now in this critical moment. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate